The aluminum hull of the bass boat bumped against the gentle, freezing chop of Lake Oconee. It was 2:14 a.m. The damp cold seeped through Mark's heavy fleece, but his mind was entirely focused on the glowing sonar screen on the console. A few feet away at the bow, Dave rhythmically cast a spinnerbait into the pitch-black water, the mechanical whir of the reel the only sound for miles. They were completely isolated, exactly as Dave had planned. Then, Mark's phone vibrated against his ribs. He pulled it out, squinting against the harsh glare of the screen. Arthur Harrison, landlord. Mark frowned. Arthur was a 60-year-old retired accountant who lived 3 doors down from the house Mark and Sarah were renting. He was notoriously strict, obsessive about neighborhood rules, and protective of his property. A call at 2 a.m. meant a crisis. Mark answered, keeping his voice low. "Hello, Arthur." "Mark, I don't care that you're on a lake. You need to call your wife right now." Arthur's voice was a tight, furious hiss. Mark's analytical mind instantly categorized the tone. Not an emergency requiring paramedics, but a severe violation of order. "What's going on, Arthur?" "I was up getting a glass of water 15 minutes ago," Arthur snapped. "I watched 2 men walk up your driveway and go right through your front door. 5 minutes later, the bass from your living room started rattling my windows. I was putting my boots on to march over there and call the police, but the music suddenly cut out about 60 seconds ago. Dead silent now. But those men are still inside your house, Mark. I am looking at your driveway." Mark processed the timeline. 2 men entered, music started, then abruptly stopped. Someone inside had realized they were being too loud and killed the audio to avoid detection. "Don't call the police yet, Arthur," Mark said evenly. "Let me check the cameras and contact Sarah. Give me 5 minutes." 5 minutes, Arthur confirmed, and hung up. Mark lowered the phone. He stared out at the impenetrable blackness of the tree line. Sarah was supposed to be asleep. She had an early shift at the dental clinic tomorrow. She was a notoriously light sleeper. A car door slamming across the street would wake her. There was zero statistical probability that 2 men could walk into her house and play heavy bass without her waking up and triggering the security system. "Everything good, man?" Dave called back from the bow, not turning around. "Yeah," Mark said smoothly. "Just a spam call." Mark opened his smart home folder. First stop, the Ring doorbell app. He pulled up the timeline. It was completely blank since 6:30 p.m. No motion detected. But Arthur was a pedantic man, not a liar. If Arthur saw 2 men go inside, they went inside. This meant whoever entered knew exactly how to hug the brick wall to avoid the camera's motion zone, or someone inside had temporarily paused the sensor alerts from their smartphone. Mark opened his messages. "Mark, Arthur just called me. He's furious. Said he saw 2 guys walk into our house and heard loud music, but it just stopped. Are you okay?" He watched the screen. The 3 gray typing dots appeared within 4 seconds. It was incredibly fast for someone waking up from a deep REM cycle. Sarah. "OMG, what?" "I just woke up to my phone buzzing. The house is completely dark and quiet. I am locking the bedroom door right now. I'm scared." Mark stared at the glowing text. It was the perfect, logical response of a terrified wife. She didn't deny the event. She validated his concern and immediately took a defensive posture. 10 seconds later, a video file arrived. Mark pressed play, turning the media volume down. The video showed Sarah's face illuminated only by the soft, blue glow of her screen. Her hair was perfectly tousled across her pillow. The room behind her was pitch black. "Mark, I'm whispering," she breathed into the camera, her eyes wide with manufactured fear. "I locked the door. I don't hear anything downstairs. The alarm didn't go off. I think Arthur is hallucinating or saw someone at the neighbor's house. Please don't call the cops. They'll make a huge scene and I have work at 7 a.m. I'm just going to stay in bed. Love you." The video ended. Mark played it again. He scrutinized the footage with the detached, clinical precision of a software auditor looking for a bug in the code. Sarah's performance was Oscar-worthy, but her physiology betrayed her. The ambient noise in the room was indeed completely silent, proving the music was off. but Mark noticed her collarbone. In the blue light of the phone, her chest was rising and falling in rapid, shallow increments. She wasn't breathing like someone who had just woken up. Her respiratory rate was elevated. It was the breathing of someone running on fresh adrenaline. Someone who had just scrambled up the stairs in a panic after killing the living room speakers. Furthermore, Buster, their golden retriever, was nowhere to be seen. Buster slept at the foot of the bed and always investigated when Sarah spoke. The dog wasn't in the bedroom. Mark typed his reply, his face a passive mask in the cold night. Mark. Okay, stay in the room. Keep the door locked. I am going to check the network logs to see if any device is connected to the Wi-Fi. I'll handle it remotely. He hit send. He knew that message would trigger absolute chaos on the other end. Sarah knew he was a systems architect. She knew what network logs meant. Bite's completely dead, Dave muttered, turning away from the water to grab a different lure from his tackle box. You sure everything is all right with you? You're staring a hole through that phone. Just troubleshooting a server issue for work, Mark lied, his voice flat. Trying to figure out where the breach is. The boat rocked gently on the black water. Mark didn't need the cameras anymore. Optics could be staged, and videos could be manipulated. He needed the raw data. He needed the router logs. The darkness over Lake Oconee was absolute, broken only by the pale, artificial glow of Mark's smartphone screen. He sat motionless near the console of the base boat, the cold dampness of the night air pressing against his heavy jacket. A few feet away, Dave was a dark silhouette at the bow, softly humming a country song under his breath as he reeled in another cast. To anyone else, the video Sarah had just sent would have been the end of the conversation. A terrified wife locking herself in her bedroom, relying on her husband to keep her safe. But Mark was a senior network architect. He didn't trust optics. He trusted data. Humans lied. Server logs did not. Mark opened his mobile browser and initiated a secure VPN tunnel to his home network. The loading bar crawled across the top of his screen, fighting the weak 5G signal bouncing across the open water. Dave had explicitly chosen this spot on the lake because it was a notorious dead zone. But Mark had recently upgraded his phone's antenna for remote server maintenance. He had just enough bandwidth to get through. The administrative dashboard of his enterprise-grade router materialized on the screen. It was a brutal, clinical spreadsheet of IP addresses, MAC addresses, and active traffic graphs. A digital blueprint of his home. First, Mark navigated to the real-time traffic analytics. He located the MAC address for the living room Sonos smart speaker. He pulled up the usage graph for the last hour. From 1:30 a.m. to 2:10 a.m., the graph showed a solid, elevated plateau of continuous data consumption, roughly 320 kilobits per second. It was the exact bandwidth signature of a high-fidelity Spotify stream. Then, precisely 4 minutes ago, the line plummeted into a sheer vertical drop, flatlining to near zero idle bytes. Arthur's timeline was flawless. The music had been blasting, and the moment Arthur stepped onto his porch, or Sarah received Mark's first text, someone had scrambled downstairs in a blind panic and forcefully cut the audio. Mark's phone buzzed in his palm. It was a new text. Sarah had realized the trap he set by mentioning the network logs. She needed to divert his attention from the digital footprint to a physical, immediate threat. Sarah. Mark, please. I just heard a loud thump downstairs. I'm dialing 911. Don't waste time on the computer stuff. They might be inside. Mark stared at the glowing text. It was a desperate, brilliant move. By claiming she was calling the police, she was trying to force Mark to drop the investigation in panic. But Mark knew she couldn't actually call 911. If the police showed up now, they wouldn't find burglars. They would find the men Arthur had seen walking through the front door. Mark's thumbs moved steadily over the glass screen, his face an unreadable mask of shadows and blue light. Mark, do not call 911 yet. If it's a false alarm, Arthur will use the police report to formally evict us for a noise violation. Give me 2 minutes to pull the active device list. Stay hidden. He watched the screen. The typing dots appeared, vanished, and appeared again. She was trapped in a logic loop. She couldn't argue without sounding suspicious. Sarah. Okay, hurry, I am shaking. Mark switched back to the router interface. He opened the DHCP client list, the registry of every single device currently connected to their home Wi-Fi. In his house, the guest network password was printed on a magnetic card on the kitchen fridge. Anyone who stayed longer than 5 minutes usually connected to it. He scrolled past the smart thermostat, the refrigerator, and his own desktop computer. Near the bottom of the list, under the guest_network subnet, sat 2 freshly leased IP addresses. Mark looked at the host names, and the freezing night air suddenly felt like a vacuum, pulling the oxygen from his lungs. Leo iPhone, Mike's iPhone. Mark tapped on Leo iPhone to view the details. The connection timestamp showed the lease was granted at 1:45 a.m. Mike's iPhone had joined 2 minutes later at 1:47 a.m. Leo. Mark slowly lifted his head and looked at the back of Dave's heavy winter coat. Dave. His best friend of 6 years. The man who had helped him move into that rental house. The man who had stood beside him at his wedding. Leo was Dave's 22-year-old younger brother, a college dropout who bounced between jobs and occasionally worked at the same dental clinic where Sarah managed the front desk. Mark remembered Dave casually mentioning a few weeks ago that Leo had been spending a lot of time hanging around the clinic to bring Sarah coffee. Mark had thought nothing of it. The architecture of the betrayal materialized in Mark's mind with devastating, geometric clarity. Sarah wasn't just having an affair. She was sleeping with the younger brother of Mark's best friend. And Dave knew. Dave had to know. The realization washed over Mark, but he didn't feel rage. He felt an icy, terrifying hyperfocus. Dave was the one who had insisted on this last-minute, overnight fishing trip. Just us guys, man. No cell service, no wives, just the lake. I know a great cove. It wasn't a bonding trip. It was a calculated extraction. Dave was the warden, keeping Mark isolated on a boat in the middle of nowhere, so his little brother could sleep with Mark's wife in Mark's bed. And who was Mike? Mark didn't know a Mike. But the logic was simple. Leo had brought a wingman, maybe a buddy to give him a ride, or someone he had been drinking with earlier. This Mike was the catastrophic variable. He was the sloppy, arrogant factor who had cranked up the Sonos and brazenly walked through the front door, blowing their stealth and waking up the neighborhood watchdog. Sarah had likely bypassed the Ring doorbell's motion sensors from her phone to sneak Leo in. But she hadn't anticipated the wingman throwing a concert in her living room. Mark's breathing slowed to a deliberate, measured rhythm. A lesser man would have screamed. He would have thrown a tackle box, confronted Dave, and demanded a physical altercation. But Mark treated his life the same way he treated a compromised server. Emotion was a liability during a system failure. It clouded judgment and led to poor troubleshooting. Right now, he was a man trapped on a dark boat with a traitor, 2 hours away from a house occupied by his wife and her lover. He opened his messages and navigated to his thread with the landlord. Mark, Arthur. I see 2 unauthorized devices on my network. You were right. Do not call the police yet. I am handling it. Give me exactly 45 minutes to get off this lake and get back. The reply came less than a minute later. Arthur, 45 minutes. Not a second more. If that house isn't quiet and empty by 3 a.m., I am dialing 911 and bringing my own shotgun out to the porch. Mark locked his phone and slipped it deep into his jacket pocket. He looked at the center console of the boat. Dave's phone was sitting there, face down on the fiberglass, right next to the boat's ignition keys. Any luck up there? Mark asked, his voice steady, devoid of any tremor. Dave glanced back over his shoulder, a relaxed, easy smile on his face. Nah, they're not biting. We might just have to crack a beer and wait for the sun to come up, man. Yeah, Mark said, his eyes shifting from Dave's smile down to the ignition keys. We might just have to do that. The silence on Lake Oconee was heavy, almost suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic lapping of black water against the aluminum hull. Mark sat motionless, his mind operating at a terrifying, overclocked speed. The router logs had provided the irrefutable data. His wife was currently entertaining her lover, who happened to be his best friend's younger brother, and a random stranger in his living room. Now, Mark needed to test the physical variables in his immediate environment. He needed to measure the exact depth of Dave's complicity. Mark slowly slipped his phone into his heavy coat pocket and stood up. The boat rocked slightly under his weight. "Reel it in, Dave," Mark said. His voice was completely devoid of its usual warmth. It was a flat, utilitarian command. "We're packing up." Dave paused mid-crank, turning his head sharply. In the dim, ambient starlight, Mark could see the sudden, rigid tension in his friend's shoulders. The easygoing posture vanished instantly. "Whoa, what? Pack up?" Dave let out a forced, breathy laugh that sounded thin and unnatural in the cold air. "Dude, it's not even 2:30. The morning bite is going to be legendary. What's going on?" "Arthur isn't backing down," Mark lied smoothly, his face cast in shadow, watching Dave's micro-expressions. "He texted me again. He says the two guys he saw are definitely inside, and he's going to call 911. If Sarah is asleep with the door locked, she won't hear them if they try to break into the bedroom. I'm not taking the risk. We need to get back." Dave fully turned around now, setting his fishing rod down against the gunnel with exaggerated slowness. "Mark, come on, man. You saw the video she sent. She's perfectly fine. Buster is probably just sleeping quietly. Arthur is a paranoid old boomer who hates renters. You're really going to ruin the whole trip over a noise complaint?" Mark pulled his phone back out, opening his messaging app. He needed to apply pressure to both sides of the conspiracy simultaneously to see how they reacted. "Mark, Arthur is insisting someone broke in. He says he's calling the cops in 40 minutes if I don't handle it. I told Dave to pack up the boat. We are leaving the lake now to check on you." He hit send. He didn't have to wait long. The 3 gray typing dots appeared almost instantly. Sarah was wide awake, actively monitoring her phone, frantically managing the crisis from her end. "Sarah." "Mark, please stop. It was probably just a raccoon getting into the trash cans outside. Do not ruin Dave's trip. I am perfectly safe. I will go downstairs and check the locks right now if it makes you feel better." Mark read the text, his expression unchanging. It was a desperate, transparent gambit. She was trying to buy time, offering to check the house to pacify him. He knew exactly what was happening in that living room. They were scrambling. Leo and his unknown friend, Mike, were likely gathering their clothes and belongings, trying to erase their footprint before Arthur made good on his threat. "Look, man," Dave said, stepping toward the center console. His voice had taken on a placating, almost patronizing tone. "Let's just wait until sunrise. If Arthur really thought someone was breaking in, he would have called the cops already. Let her sleep. Let's just fish." "No," Mark said. The absolute finality in his tone left no room for debate. "Start the engine." Dave stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. Mark could almost see the mental gears grinding in Dave's head. Dave was running out of dialogue options. He was supposed to be the anchor, keeping Mark tethered to this isolated lake, miles away from cell towers and paved roads. If Mark left now, the timeline collapsed. His little brother would be caught red-handed. "Fine. Whatever, man. Your funeral when she yells at you for waking her up," Dave muttered, his tone shifting from friendly to irritable. He stepped up to the console and reached for the ignition keys resting on the slick fiberglass dashboard. What happened next was a masterpiece of clumsy theater. As Dave's heavy, gloved fingers brushed the plastic float attached to the keychain, he inexplicably fumbled. His hand jerked awkwardly, swiping the keys off the surface. Mark watched the keys fall in slow motion. They hit the metal decking with a sharp clack, bounced off the side of the built-in cooler, and dropped straight down into the narrow, unlit crevice of the boat's bilge compartment, disappearing into the oily, freezing water at the bottom of the hull. "Oh, crap!" Dave yelled, immediately dropping to his knees and blindly thrusting his arm down into the dark gap. "Crap! Crap! Crap! My bad, man! My hands are freezing. I couldn't feel them." Mark didn't move. He simply looked down at the back of Dave's head. The performance was pathetic, but highly effective. Retrieving those keys from the dark, cramped bilge water without proper lighting would take at least 20 minutes. Maybe 30. Exactly the amount of time Sarah needed to clear the house. "I can't see a thing down here," Dave grunted, his shoulder wedged against the fiberglass. "It's pitch black. The water is freezing." "You need a light," Mark stated. It was a sterile observation, not an offer to help. "Yeah, grab my phone. It's right there on the dash. Turn on the flashlight." Mark stepped forward. He reached out and picked up Dave's smartphone. It was heavy and cold in his hand. He pressed the side button to wake the screen, so he could access the quick menu flashlight icon. The OLED screen flared to life, illuminating Mark's face in the darkness. He didn't activate the flashlight. His thumb froze, hovering over the glass. There, sitting squarely in the center of Dave's locked screen, was a fresh, unread iMessage notification. The sender name was simply listed as Sarah. Mark stared at the glowing pixels. He read the words once, then twice, letting the absolute reality of the betrayal wash over him like ice water. Sarah. Did he buy it? Stall him. We need 40 minutes to get them out. Mike is too drunk to drive. Mark's breathing stopped. The puzzle was complete. Every piece locked into place with sickening precision. Dave wasn't just covering for his brother after the fact. Dave was actively communicating with Mark's wife, coordinating the logistics of her infidelity in real time. They were a team. Sarah, Leo, and Dave. They had orchestrated this entire weekend. Dave had played the role of the loyal best friend, sitting in the freezing cold, making small talk about lures and weather, all while acting as a remote sentry for his brother's affair. The depth of the deception was total. 6 years of friendship, weekend barbecues, helping Dave fix his truck, standing at the altar together. All of it was a fabricated utility. Dave was using him, just like Sarah was using him. "You find the light, man?" Dave's muffled voice echoed from the floor of the boat. "My arm is going numb down here. I think I feel the plastic float, but I need to see." Mark stood in the darkness, the phone still glowing in his palm. He looked at the message one last time. Mike is too drunk to drive. They were trapped. Leo and Mike couldn't leave quickly. Arthur was watching the street. Mark was on the lake. A terrifying cold calm descended over Mark. The frantic desire to rush home evaporated, replaced by the calculating patience of an architect designing a demolition. They wanted 40 minutes. They wanted to stall. He would give them exactly what they asked for. Mark's thumb finally moved. He swiped down, tapped the flashlight icon, and the harsh white LED blinded the surrounding darkness. The blinding white beam of the smartphone flashlight cut through the darkness of the boat, illuminating the floating dust motes in the freezing air. Mark held the phone steady, pointing the beam down into the dark, oily crevice of the bilge. He kept his expression completely neutral, locking away the absolute devastation he had just witnessed on the lock screen. The architecture of his marriage and his best friendship had just collapsed, but Mark didn't mourn. He calculated. "Here," Mark said, his voice dropping back to its normal, measured cadence. Dave squinted against the glare, reaching up to take the phone. "Thanks, man. Give me a second, I think I see the plastic float." For 2 agonizing minutes, Dave put on a show of grunting and straining, his thick winter coat scraping against the fiberglass hull. Mark sat back down in the swivel chair near the console, watching the performance with the detached interest of a scientist observing a rat in a maze. Dave needed to stall for 40 minutes so his brother could sober up his friend and escape. Mark decided to hand him a victory. "Got him," Dave finally announced, holding up the dripping, algae-slicked keys with a triumphant, breathless sigh. He tossed them onto the console and wiped his wet, freezing hand on his jeans. "Man, that water is ice. We're lucky they didn't sink into the drain plug." Dave stood up, shivering, and looked at Mark, waiting for the inevitable command to start the engine. Instead, Mark leaned back in his chair and let out a long, artificial sigh. "You know what, Dave? Forget it." Dave froze. "What?" "Forget it," Mark repeated, projecting a tone of exhausted defeat. "You were right. Navigating this lake in pitch black just to humor a paranoid boomer is ridiculous. Arthur is just looking for a reason to complain. I'm not ruining the trip over it. The wave of relief that washed over Dave's face was so profound, it was almost comical. His rigid shoulders instantly dropped, and he let out a loud, genuine laugh. Are you serious? Oh, thank goodness, man. I did not want to drive this boat right now. You're making the right call. Sarah is fine. Let the old man yell at the clouds. Yeah, Mark said quietly. Let's just wait for the sun. Dave practically skipped back to his seat at the bow. Within seconds, Mark saw the faint, telltale blue glow illuminating Dave's jacket. Dave was texting. Mark didn't need to see the screen to know exactly what was being transmitted across the cellular network. Dave was sending the all clear. He was telling Sarah that the crisis was averted, that the husband had been neutralized, and that they had the rest of the night to quietly clean up the mess. Mark pulled his own phone from his pocket. He needed to solidify their false sense of security before springing the trap. He opened his message thread with his wife. Mark. Dave actually dropped the boat keys into the bilge water. By the time he fished them out, we realized it's too dark to navigate safely. We are just going to stay put until sunrise. Go back to sleep. I'll call Arthur in the morning and tell him to back off. The response was almost instantaneous. Sarah, riding the high of believing she had successfully manipulated him, couldn't help but play the loving, concerned wife one last time. Sarah. Oh my gosh, that is terrible. Are you guys freezing? I just went downstairs and double-checked all the locks. Everything is perfectly fine here. Try to stay warm, babe. See you tomorrow. Love you. Mark read the words, love you. He felt nothing. The emotional center of his brain had completely shut down, leaving only cold, mechanical logic. He minimized the chat window with Sarah forever. It was time to execute. He opened his thread with Arthur Harrison. Mark. Arthur. I just checked my network data. The men inside the house are not my guests. They are unauthorized intruders. Call 911 right now and report a home invasion in progress. I am activating the security sirens to flush them out. Mark watched the delivery receipt change to read. He knew the retired accountant had been sitting by his window, phone in hand, waiting for the 45-minute timer to expire. Arthur. Dialing dispatch on my landline right now. Give them hell, Mark. I'm turning on my porch camera. Mark closed the messaging app. He took a slow, deep breath of the freezing lake air, letting it fill his lungs, and then opened his central smart home management application. Because Mark rented, he couldn't hardwire a traditional security system into the drywall. Instead, he had built a custom, modular network of high-end wireless devices. In the main downstairs hallway, directly adjacent to the living room, he had installed an industrial-grade, 120-decibel panic siren. It was a device designed for warehouses, capable of causing physical ear pain and immediate auditory disorientation. He had also synced the system to the exterior smart bulbs lining the front porch and the driveway. He navigated to the emergency control tab. The screen glowed an angry, warning red. Warning. Manual activation will override all schedules. Proceed. Mark looked up. Dave was humming again, casting his line back out into the black water, entirely oblivious to the digital guillotine hovering over his brother's neck. Mark looked back down at his phone. He placed his thumb over the large, pulsing button labeled Trigger Panic Protocol. Leo and his drunk friend, Mike, were currently trapped in the living room. They were likely relaxing, whispering in the dark, believing they had hours to sober up and slip out unnoticed before the neighborhood woke up. Sarah was likely upstairs, smiling in her bed, proud of her flawless deception. Mark pressed the button. The app loading circle spun for exactly 1.5 seconds as the command beamed from the cell tower, down to the local ISP, through Mark's router, and directly into the hardware of the house. The screen flashed a solid, blinding crimson. Status: alarm active. Sitting in the dead, freezing silence of Lake Oconee, Mark couldn't hear a thing. But in his mind's eye, he could see it perfectly. He knew that 80 miles away, his living room had just erupted into absolute, deafening chaos. Mark sat in the swivel chair of the baseboat, surrounded by the freezing, absolute silence of Lake Oconee. But the screen in his hand was a window into pure, unadulterated chaos. He closed the smart home control panel and instantly opened the Ring camera application, tapping into the live feed of his front porch. Because he had activated the exterior emergency strobes, the normally dark driveway was now violently pulsing with blinding flashes of white LED light. On the boat, it was a silent movie of destruction. Back at the house, Mark knew the 120-decibel industrial siren was currently liquefying any coherent thought inside those walls. A banner notification dropped down across the top of the flashing video feed. Sarah, Mark, the alarm is going off. It hurts my ears. Call the cops. Someone is downstairs. Mark swiped the notification away without replying. He didn't blink. He just watched the screen with the cold, unyielding stare of an executioner watching the trapdoor fall. On the video feed, the heavy oak front door of his rental house burst open. Two young men stumbled out onto the porch, violently bathed in the strobe lights. They were both clutching the sides of their heads, their faces twisted in agony from the ear-piercing siren. One of them, a tall kid in a dark hoodie, was practically dragging the other. Mark recognized the tall one instantly from the photos on Dave's social media. It was Leo. The other guy, Mike, was completely incapacitated by alcohol and the noise, his legs buckling as they hit the front walkway. They tried to make a run for the street, desperate to escape the agonizing perimeter of the alarm. They didn't make it. Sweeping into the frame from the left side of the street came the harsh, rhythmic flash of red and blue. Two local police cruisers jumped the curb, their spotlights cutting through the strobes to pin Leo and Mike to the grass, like insects on a display board. Officers piled out, weapons drawn, yelling commands that the Ring microphone barely picked up over the blaring siren. Leo immediately dropped to his knees, throwing his hands behind his head in total surrender. Mike simply collapsed onto the turf. Another text notification pinged on Mark's screen. Arthur, police have them on the grass. Excellent response time. Your wife just walked out. It's quite a show. Mark kept his eyes locked on the live feed. Arthur was right. A second later, Sarah stepped through the open front door. She was wearing her silk pajamas, playing her rehearsed part to perfection. She stood on the porch, her hands over her mouth, projecting the image of a terrified, innocent homeowner who had just survived a harrowing home invasion. But then, the reality of the situation crashed into her. Through the lens of the camera, Mark watched the exact second Sarah's perfect lie died. She looked past the police cruisers and saw Arthur Harrison standing at the edge of his property, his arms crossed, watching her. She looked at the surrounding houses. Every single porch light on the street had clicked on. Neighbors were stepping out in their bathrobes, standing on their lawns, watching the spectacle. And then, she looked down at the two burglars, prone on her front grass. The police officers were pulling Leo up by his hoodie to search him. He was looking directly at Sarah. The entire neighborhood was bearing witness. Her lover wasn't slipping out the back door in the dark. He was being handcuffed under the glare of police spotlights and neighborhood scrutiny. There was no spinning this. There was no gaslighting her way out. Her utter humiliation was public, documented, and absolute. Mark's phone began to vibrate violently in his hand. The Ring video feed minimized, replaced by an incoming call screen. Sarah, mobile. Mark let it ring twice. Then, he tapped the green icon and brought the phone to his ear. "Mark!" Sarah shrieked, her voice a hysterical, panicked sob. "Mark! Oh my God! We are being robbed! The police are here. They caught them right on our lawn. Where are you? You have to come home. I'm so scared." She was still trying. Even as the structure burned to the ground around her, she was desperately trying to hold up a single, scorched pillar of her lie. It was pathetic. Mark listened to her fake sobs for 3 seconds. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. When he spoke, his voice was a flat, chilling void of emotion. It was the voice of a man deleting a corrupted file. "I know," Mark said with cold, absolute finality. "I triggered the alarm. Have fun explaining Leo to the cops." He pulled the phone away from his ear and pressed end call before she could draw a breath to reply. Without a second of hesitation, he opened her contact profile, scrolled to the bottom of the screen, and tapped Block Caller. He then did the same to her text messages. He completely severed her connection to his network. Mark slowly stood up. The boat rocked gently beneath him. The cold air stung his cheeks, but he felt lighter than he had in years. The cancerous variables had been identified and permanently quarantined. He looked toward the bow. Dave was leaning against the railing, humming quietly, staring out at the black water. He had his hands in his pockets, completely oblivious to the fact that his brother was currently being loaded into the back of a squad car. Mark walked over to the center console. The heavy set of boat keys with their plastic float, the ones Dave had so theatrically retrieved from the bilge, were sitting on the fiberglass dashboard where Dave had tossed them. Mark picked them up. They were still damp and freezing cold. "Hey, Dave!" Mark called out, his voice cutting clearly through the crisp night air. Dave turned around, a relaxed, easy smile on his face. "Yeah, man? You changed your mind about waiting?" Mark didn't answer. He simply held Dave's gaze, his expression a mask of terrifying, absolute calm. Instead of throwing them, Mark deliberately slipped the heavy keys deep into the inner pocket of his fleece coat and pulled the zipper completely shut. Then, he stepped up to the captain's chair and flipped the boat's master power switch. Dave's smile vanished instantly. His eyes darted from Mark's pocket to the glowing dashboard, his relaxed posture collapsing into sudden, rigid panic. "What? What are you doing?" Dave stammered, taking a hesitant step away from the bow. "Mark, what's going on?" Mark slid his phone into his other pocket. He looked at the man who had been his best friend, the man who had sold him out to coordinate a cheap affair. "Your brother just got arrested," Mark said quietly, his voice a sterile, chilling void. "They dragged him out of my house in handcuffs while the whole neighborhood watched. Now, sit down on the bow and keep your mouth shut until we hit the dock. Your game is over."
Wow, what a ride. The most fascinating part of this story isn't just the betrayal, but Mark's chillingly calculated response. We're so used to seeing explosive, emotional confrontations, but Mark treated his ruined marriage exactly like a compromised server. He relied purely on data because humans lie, but router logs don't. In my opinion, the absolute worst part isn't even Sarah's infidelity, it's Dave. Having your best friend of 6 years act as a decoy while his own brother sleeps with your wife is a level of deception that's truly terrifying. It proves that sometimes the most dangerous threats are the ones sitting right next to you in the dark. But I want to hear from you guys. What would you have done if you were trapped on that freezing boat? Would you confront Dave immediately or play the cold calculating game like Mark did? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.